go. Okay, so we're holding the middle of page 7a in Maseches Megillah, and we were learning about the different Sifrei Kodesh as we know them, because the rabbis instituted that those Sfarim that are from the Chumash should be considered tamei, make the hands tamei. And the reason we learned this is because they want that the people should hold the Sfarim sacred, and that we should and also that they were keeping the truma tithings by the Sfarim, because they figure if the Sfarim are holy, and hold on, let's let everyone in. The Sfarim are holy, and hold on a second, guys. My computer's acting up. It's not letting me let her in. Let's do this again. Okay, so we got Judith in, and let's just share the page. Hopefully we can get the rest of them. Okay, so the tithings are holy, and therefore the books are holy. So people keeping the books by the tithings and brought rodents and rats, etc. So that wasn't good. All right. So we're continuing to talk about different Sfarim that we're going to touch on that were what we know as Sifrei Kodesh, and we want the Chachamim are going to tell us if they're tamei or not. There's other discussions about this in other places in the Talmud. So we learned we were trying to figure out if Esther is one of those books. It means we're learning the tractate of Megillah. Our subject at hand is Purim. So we want to know where we're holding with regard to Esther. So the opinion was that Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh, with the divine spirit, and therefore it would be included it would be part of the Chumash, the canon, and it would be also Metamis Yadayim. It also make the hands impure. So Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer, Rabbi Shimon the son of Menashe says as follows: that the book of Kohelet, written by Shlomo HaMelech, Metamis Yadayim. Kohelet doesn't make the hands impure. Why? Because it's Shlomo's wisdom. So if it's Shlomo's wisdom, then hold on, this is going to be a problem here tonight. Okay, so because it's Shlomo's wisdom, it's Shlomo said it, so to say, on his own. It wasn't part of the Ruach HaKodesh. It wasn't part of the Sfarim that have to be considered as Sifrei Kodesh. So therefore, if it's not a Sefer Kodesh, it's not included as one of the things, one of the Sfarim that would be Metame Yadayim, that would make the hands impure. Means the definition of if it makes the hands impure means it's holy. It's one of the Chumash. If it doesn't make the hands impure, then the Gzeira, the decree that we wanted to keep the Sifrei Kodesh intact, and there shouldn't be rodents, and you should respect it properly, etc., is a sign that it's not. If it doesn't make the hands impure, seemingly you would think, well, if it's holy, it doesn't make the hands impure, but it's the opposite. Because it's holy, we want to make sure people treat it with care, and because we want people to treat it with care, so therefore we if we say that it makes the hands impure, then we know if it's one of the holy books. But if it's not making the hands impure, it means it's not considered one of the holy books. The Gemara says, one second, you want to say the reason is because this is just Kohelet is just Shlomo writing his wisdom. But like for number, we have another verse that says, he said 3,000 mashalim. He said 3,000 proverbs. Don't add. The fact that he says he shouldn't add in Mishlei, he says he shouldn't add Mishlei is proverbs. The fact that he said he shouldn't add means to say that why? Because if he's just writing his own writings, he could add as much as he wants. So why does it say he shouldn't add? Because this is what's considered part of Sifrei Kodesh. This is what's considered part of the sacred books. So we see clearly that he had other things, and if he penned Kohelet and Mishlei, then Kohelet and Mishlei are Sifrei Kodesh. So Rashi says that v'halei kfar nemer reidaber v'keheles kfar nemer v'kiven delay kosiv as kulon lamadata shema shekosiv Ruach HaKodesh Isa. The very fact had other things to say, and he said like al taisif dvar don't add, means to say that whatever you wrote, that's holy. That everything else is ideas that are great and wise, and from Shlomo Melech knows making light of what he writes, but it's not part of the Sefer Kodesh. Al taisiv al dvar of mikra hu b'sefer Mishlei. This is a pasuk in Mishlei, in Proverbs. So from here we see clearly that if he writes that he can't write more, meaning that he can't write if he's being limited, because what he wrote was considered part of Sefer Kodesh, anything else would not. So the question is, we have two proofs that Shlomo Melech wrote Kohelet from Ruach HaKodesh, from the divine spirit, and therefore it's part of, okay, you have to remember there's two things here, because when you get back to the subject in Esther, there's a person who has Ruach HaKodesh, has the divine spirit, and there's the writing it as a book with Ruach HaKodesh. It's not the same thing. We're going to talk about we're going to go back to the Megillah in a second. So we could say that the fact that Mordechai had Ruach HaKodesh doesn't mean that the writing of Esther was done with Ruach HaKodesh. It means to write it as a sefer is with divine spirit is different than talking that Mordechai in throughout the story had divine spirit. So here we're saying that Shlomo Melech should not write anymore. He had 3,000 other ideas to say. He didn't express all his ideas, meaning what he expressed was written with Ruach HaKodesh, meaning that the book itself was part of Sifrei Kodesh, part of the Holy Scripture. There's a Hayom Yom from the Rebbe that it's an interesting Hayom Yom, because it's obviously Hayom Yoms are very interesting, all of them. Some of them we understand, some of them we don't understand, like it's what is it doing here? What is it connected to this day? There's a lot to study. Hayom Yom is not a simple book. It seems like, oh, it's a one line there, but it's a nice line. You have to slow down when you read the Hayom Yom to analyze why it was said specifically on this day. Some things are more obvious than others. So one of the Hayom Yoms, the Rebbe writes that it's a tradition that up until the Shach and Taz, which are the commentaries that we learned about on the Shulchan Aruch, that up until them was the books of the Rishonim, Tosfos, the Sifrei Halacha, Shulchan Aruch, were all written with Ruach HaKodesh. Means that the Shach and Taz, up until the Shach and Taz, and the Shach and Taz included, that's around the year 15 something. Right? Shlomo Melech is almost 800 years before the Common Era, right? So we're talking about in the years 15 already. The Rebbe writes that the tradition by Jews was that up until through the Shach and Taz was written in Ruach HaKodesh. But there's different levels of Ruach HaKodesh. There's different levels of divine spirit. So we're talking, so therefore, up into the Shach and Taz, it's not so, you can't just say, I was listening to a podcast last week where the person's putting down the Bach. We all know the Bach was the father-in-law of the Taz. We learned about him in our stories. We have to talk with Derech Eretz. We're talking about people that wrote with divine spirit. And the tradition is that through the Shach and Taz was written with Ruach HaKodesh. Not just that he had Ruach HaKodesh, but what he wrote was with Ruach HaKodesh, with the divine spirit. But nevertheless, there's different levels of Ruach HaKodesh. And we were talking about the level of the divine spirit that would make the book sacred, part of the Sifrei Kodesh, part of the written Torah, not the oral Torah. All right. So now the question is, why do we have to bring two proofs? We brought one proof was that he had 3,000 examples per verse, and another one is that the verse says don't write more. So we see he had more to write, and there's a verse that talks about that he had more to write, and that also he shouldn't write more. So the question is, my Omer, why do we have to mention the second verse? So if you want to say he had a lot more to say, so you may think he had more to say, and therefore, if he wanted to, it's up to him to write or not to write. So therefore, the verse comes and says that you're not onto these words. That means, apparently, the reason that it is prohibited to add to the Proverbs is that the book of Kohelet was divinely inspired. So therefore, the idea is that if it's divinely inspired, you can't add it. Okay. Let's see Rashi. Rashi says, "Dibar kasav, ibai lai kasav." The masha kasav mashalas ba'almaninu. V'leim pei kadosh baruch hu. So you may think that he just wrote He decided he had 3,000 examples, but he didn't have to include all of them. He decided what he wanted to write. The fact that it says in Mishlei that's the fact that we have a verse in Malachim, in Kings, that Shlomo Melech had 3,000 proverbs to say, mashalim to say, and so we don't know still that he's writing with Ruach HaKodesh. Could be he could decide what he wants to include in his writings. A lot of people have ideas. Not everything you publish. So what does it mean Ruach HaKodesh? So here Rashi says, what does it mean Ruach HaKodesh? He says this Rashi and the Rashi before, is he writing what God is saying? The written Torah is the word of God. So is he writing what God is saying? We learned that there's a difference between Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. We learned last week. Torah is Moshe spoke, God wrote. The prophecies is that there was a prophecy and they wrote. And the writings is from Hashem, but in a way that it is in a way of Ruach HaKodesh. But it's all from Hashem. This is the written Torah. So maybe Shlomo Melech had a lot to say, but it wasn't from God. It was his ideas. So Tashma Taisiv al Dvarim Midika Omer Lahaisiv Aleim Shema Mina Baruch HaKodesh Nemer. The fact, Midika Aser Lahaisiv Aleim, from the very fact that he was forbidden to add, means it's not up to him. Not just that he could choose what to add and what not to add. Means everything he wrote was with the Ruach HaKodesh. Tanya. Okay, we're not talking about Mishlei over. We're talking about Kohelet. But like Reb Sheinzad says, from Mishlei we learn about the Kohelet. Okay. So we go back now to Esther, to our story. Was Esther, again, the fact that Mordechai had divine spirit doesn't mean that he wrote it with divine spirit. Meaning that when we're talking about the written Torah, the Torah Shebichsav, even the Ksuvim, which is at the third level, is Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. Torah, again, Moshe spoke and wrote. God spoke and Moshe wrote. We want to know if the actual book itself was written in Ruach HaKodesh. So to say, was God telling the story? Is God telling the story of Esther? Is it one of the books of the Torah? So Tanya Rabbi Lezer Omer Esther Ruach HaKodesh Nemra. Esther, what Rabbi Lezer says that Esther was said with the divine spirit. Shnemar, how do we know? So now we're going to start quoting a whole bunch of verses in the story of Esther, that how would they know what happened? Not everything in the story was public. And anyone who has ever read the Lubavitcher Rebbe's memoirs, which are incredible, they're called this. They're in Yiddish called the Sefer Zechronis of the Rebbe of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. That he writes, it means no one's ever. The people don't write like that. Because he's not writing a novel, he's writing a story. You're writing a novel, you can write whatever you want. But if you're writing a story, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe will write things about what people were thinking. And not just public people, small people. People that you don't even, most people don't, 99.9% of people didn't even know they existed. About a person, some hidden tzaddik in a small village in Russia was thinking this and this. Obviously there's a divine spirit there. So here, one of the proofs that Esther is written in the divine spirit is there's a verse in the story of Esther. At what point? When the king Achashverosh can't sleep, right? And Mordechai and Haman comes to visit him, and he's this whole scheme planned to ask the king for permission to hang Mordechai on his 50 arm length pole, right? There's the eights, the big tree. So he comes in, and Achashverosh is all disturbed because he read his books of his Divrei Yamim, and he remembered that Mordechai saved his life. So he asks Haman, "What should I do to the person who the king really likes?" So the pasuk, there's a pasuk in the Megillah that says, "Vayomer Haman beliboy." Haman said to his heart, meaning Haman was thinking to himself. That he was thinking to himself, "Who would the king like more than me?" How does Esther know what Haman was thinking? It was a private thought. How could Esther write? She's not writing a novel. She's writing a book of a story of a Sefer Kodesh. How could she write what Haman was thinking? She had no idea what Haman was thinking. So that's the proof that it was Ruach HaKodesh. It was divine spirit. God was telling Esther and Mordechai what Haman was thinking. Because when you're writing when God is giving you the spirit, so then that's the story. Rabbi Kiva says Rabbi Kiva teaches us, it's good that we mentioned Rabbi Kiva today, he's one of the pillars of the holiday of Lag BaOmer, right? The students of Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is his student. That Esther Ruach HaKodesh Nemra, that Esther was written with divine spirit. How do we know? because there's another statement in the Megillah that says that Esther had favor in all those who looked upon her. How can you make such a general statement that everyone who looked at Esther found Esther to be favorable? Maybe some people didn't. Maybe most. How do you know? How can you make a blank statement, whoever sees Esther? The Torah can only testify about that. If God is telling us the story, then he could say this is the way it was. Anyone who saw Esther was found in favor. Okay, another proof from here that Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh. Rashi says, how does Mordechai and Esther know? Those who wrote the Megillah, that that's what Haman was saying in his heart. That Haman was thinking that the king must love me the most, because I'm the king's best friend. Because the divine spirit revealed to the writers that this is what Haman was thinking. Omer, also a student of Rabbi Kiva. So he says, Esther Ruach HaKodesh Shnemra, how do we know that Esther was written in the divine spirit? Shnemra v'yivod adavar l'Mordechai. Okay, we all know the story later, the story of Bixim Viserys. We go back to the beginning of the Megillah. Esther becomes queen. Mordechai is in a position of government. He's there. He's around. He hangs around the chevra over there of the government, and he's the one who reveals the plot of Bixim Viserys to murder Achashverosh. That fast forward many years later, when the story of Haman comes around, because there was a good gap in between those stories. That's what saves the Jewish people on paper, right? Achashverosh remembers that Mordechai saved his life, and then that gets the ball rolling where Haman trips up, and from there it's all Achashverosh flipped, right? Today you could open up the news, you could see, you could go to sleep at 11 o'clock and wake up 3 hours later and see the war started and finished 5 times, right? So Achashverosh also changed his mind 5 times. So Achashverosh, now things changed when he found out and remembered that Mordechai tried to save Achashverosh's life. So Mordechai knew that Bixim Viserys wanted to kill them. How did he know? How did Mordechai know that Bixim Viserys wanted to kill Achashverosh? Okay, we're gonna have to get back to that one. All of them, we're going to see the Gemara is going to challenge each one of them. The Gemara is going to challenge and say, it's not such a big, it's not just such a, none of these proofs are really solid proofs. We'll see that the Gemara kind of throws off all the proofs, but this is the most hard one this is the one that holds the least amount of strength, because as we're going to explain, Mordechai knew the language. So if he knew the language that they were speaking, it's not divine. But there's a bigger question here. The fact that Mordechai knew that they were going to kill, that they wanted to kill Achashverosh, even Bonagid, let's even say that Mordechai knew through Ruach HaKodesh, not because he knew the language they were speaking. They were speaking a language of Tarshish. Tarshish is like, they were speaking Mandarin, or they were speaking, better, like, Welsh. Welsh. Imagine you spoke Welsh. Who knows Welsh if you're not from Wales, right? So they were speaking Welsh. So Mordechai knew the languages. He had to know the languages. That's one of the positions of the head of the Sanhedrin. But Bonagid, he knew it through Ruach HaKodesh. That still doesn't prove that Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh. Like I said before, you have to separate the person's having Ruach HaKodesh and writing the writings with Ruach HaKodesh. So there's those who ask that question. So the Torah Evan asked that question. That the fact that Mordechai had Ruach HaKodesh still doesn't prove that the book of Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh. So the Ben Hodiah answers that says, Vayivoda Hadavar Mordechai, the thing was known to Mordechai, that the pasuk that it says that it was known to Mordechai is talking about when he wrote the Megillah. Why? Because Mordechai is writing the Megillah. Why would Mordechai praise, give himself let everyone know that he's so high that he has Ruach HaKodesh? The fact that Mordechai wrote about himself, that he had Ruach HaKodesh, he would never praise himself like that. So it means God tells him, so you have to write, right? Moshe says, it says in the Torah, Moshe is the most humble person. Moshe would never speak like that about himself. That's an opposite of humility. Why does the Torah say that Moshe is the most humble person? Because God is saying that. Moshe is just writing it. So if Mordechai says that Mordechai knew it because of Ruach HaKodesh, he would never brag. So the fact that he's writing it is a sign that he wrote it to Ruach HaKodesh. But still, there's no proof that he even knew it in Ruach HaKodesh. Maybe he understood Tarshish. Okay. Rabbi Yossi ben Durmaskis Omer, Esther Ruach HaKodesh Nermer. How do we know that Esther was written with the divine spirit? Another proof that they knew something that they shouldn't have known, or they wouldn't have been able to really know, which is at the end, right? So the king gave them permission, both sides. You have to remember again, Achashverosh is your quintessential politician. He doesn't take off the first decree. Everything is confusing. He doesn't take off the first decree. He only adds a second decree. Means Haman got Achashverosh to sign a decree that the enemies of the Jews could kill the Jews. Esther comes in and asks, rip up the paper, and then the problem's solved. No, I can't rip up the paper. There's rules, there's red tape. I gave the okay, so they could still kill you. The best I could do is let you defend yourself. Right? Some anti-Semite recently said that the book of Esther is a book of genocide. But that's Pashut cooking the story, right? If Achashverosh would have said, we're going to rip up the paper, so the Jev won't be happy. He said, I'm not ripping up the paper. And that's clearly in the text. You can't take, the Gemara says about that when the people came to Alexander the Great and said the Egyptians came to Alexander the Great and said to Alexander the Great, the Jews owe us money, because it says in the Torah, when the Bnei Israel left Egypt, they took gold and silver. We want our gold and silver back. So the rabbis were all confused. Maybe Alexander the Great's going to say, you're right, they'll give the gold and silver back. So they sent the famous old sage who comes there and says, how do you know that the Jewish people took your gold and silver? What's your source? Because the Torah says so. Okay, the Torah also says that you enslaved us for 400 years. Pay us for the fact that we were slaves, that we murdered our children, and we took advantage of our women, and then we could talk about what we owe you. First, pay us for the service we gave you for 400 years. I don't think it comes to the money we took out of you. The same thing, you can't say that Esther is a book of genocide without using the book of Esther as a source, when the book says clearly, why did the Jewish people have to fight? Because Achashverosh would not get rid of the decree. He said, all I'm allowing for you to do is defend yourself. It's going to be a fair fight now. Meaning to say the Jewish people had no permission to protect themselves up until that point. So now they were able to protect themselves against the enemies. And then when we killed, and like the Alter Rebbe says, all descendants of Amalek, 75,000. But the Torah continues and says, the Megillah continues and says, that they didn't take any of the spoils. The rule was whoever wins could take the spoils. Now the Jews, nothing has changed in 2,500 years. Had the Jewish people taken the money, right away the anti-Semites would come running out and say, look, the Jewish people taking the money. The Jewish people knew then, this is the first exile after the building of the Beis HaMikdash, so after the dynasty of the house of David and the kingdom of the north. The Jewish people were a good solid time out of the mode of exile, right? They left Egypt, but they learned fast about their enemies. So they knew clearly not to touch the money. And they knew Achashverosh would not look kindly. In fact, even though he gave them the permission to take the money, he knew that would be a bad thing. The Jewish people knew instantly that was a bad idea. So the Megillah says they didn't touch the spoils. So the question is, how do they know? How does Esther know what people took? They fought in all the countries, 180 countries, 120 countries, all the countries that were all over the kingdom of Achashverosh. Mihodu ad Kush. How could Esther write in the book with certainty that no one took any spoils? It had to be because Ruach HaKodesh said so, because the Spirit said so. Again, we're going to challenge every single one of these assumptions. How did Mordechai know? So according to the Ben Yehoidia means, how did he know to write this? Or you could say, how did he know what they were saying? Either way, it's Ruach HaKodesh. It's not, again, to know that the fact that Mordechai had Ruach HaKodesh, what they were saying, would still not prove that Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh. How did Esther and Mordechai know for certain that the people didn't touch the spoils? So it had to be that the Torah says so. Okay, so we have what we've quoted up until this point were a whole bunch of Rishonim, Tanoim, meaning to say the ones that were the scholars from the Mishnah. Before we go to Shmuel, who's from the scholars of the Talmud, the Marsha has a question. Why? The Marsha asked a question on whose opinion before. The Marsha asked a question on Rabbi Yossi ben Dur Markis, that why is he right that the Ruach HaKodesh was that they didn't touch the spoils? Why doesn't he write that there was a Ruach HaKodesh that there was that they killed 75,000? How did he know that they killed 75,000? So here again, this is there's so much. Talmud has to be, it can't be just read. You can't learn the Talmud, even especially when you learn the Haggadah, right? The Talmud is divided up into different kind of sections. We have the halacha part of the Talmud, like we're going to get to soon. What are the laws of Purim? But we have the Haggadah part of Talmud. We know that all the secrets of Torah, it's brought down. The Rebbe talks about in Tanya. It's a tradition that the deep secrets of the connection between Torah and the Jewish people and Hashem is in the stories of the Talmud, in the Haggadah of the Talmud. There's a tremendous amount between the lines, and you have to remember they had to be careful how they wrote it at the time to write it to beat the sensory, so they could put things in that the reader could get between the lines that they couldn't maybe write white and black. The fact that the Jewish people killed the 75,000, that would be publicized. Why? Because that's negative to talk about the Jews, right? Look, right? Someone just said it 2,500 years later. It's a book of genocide. But the fact that the Jewish people didn't touch the money, that story no one would tell, right? All the anti-Semites would run and say, look how many people the Jews killed. But to say a nice thing about the Jews, that look, they didn't touch the money, no one's going to report that because that's talking positive about the Jews. So the Marsha says the negative, that you would be a major scholar. You didn't have to have Ruach HaKodesh. That everyone was ready to tell that story, the negative about the Jews. But the fact that the Jewish people didn't touch the money, that no one's going to tell. Therefore, it had to come from Ruach HaKodesh. Again, this is a bittersweet statement the Gemara is telling us of that nothing's changed in the tradition of how the nations have treated the Jews throughout the years. Okay, Omer Shmuel. Shmuel is a later scholar. He's a scholar from the time of the Talmud. He's a student of Rebbe. If I was there in this discussion to know if Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh or not, I would have said there's another verse. A verse that's not about the story. A verse about a statement. And what is the statement? The statement is like this. Kimu v'kiblu, that the Jewish people, it says that they confirmed above and they took upon themselves below. Meaning, what's confirmed above? That God confirmed the story of Esther. Ma'ashikiblu lamata, that God said that this is a story. How did Esther and Mordechai know that this is a story? This is a story because to know that God accepted the story of Esther is only Ruach HaKodesh. That's it. You don't need more than that. So obviously the question is that the Gemara on Shabbos says we have another limud from Kimu v'Kiblu, which is that Kaimu Mashakiblu Kfar. There's a Mekan Moidar Rabba Lairaisa that I think we're going to see Tosfos is going to ask that question. Tosfos? Yeah, let's get it. We'll wait till we get to the Tosfos. All right. So Shmuel says, I have a verse that supports that was written in Ruach HaKodesh because the Megillah says that Hashem agreed or Bezin Shemaila, the heavenly court agreed that this is a holiday. How would you know that? You have to have Ruach HaKodesh. Okay. Omer Rav is a later scholar from the times of the Talmud, after maybe 100 years or so after Shmuel. So Rav says, Lekulu Islu Pircha, I could not only is Shmuel have a good proof, but Shmuel is the only proof. Rav says, if you ask me, I could tell you that every one of the proofs we brought until now, I could refute. Besides Shmuel, Shmuel says clearly, how do you know that God accepted, that the heavenly court accepted the holiday? And he explains why he could refute each one. The Rabbi Eliezer says that how did Esther and Mordechai know when they wrote the Megillah what Haman was thinking? Svarahu. They used logic. Why? Why? Because there is no person as important to the king as he. And also, if Haman, everything about Haman's suggestion shows that Haman thought he was the person. The very fact that he was almost requesting what is it called? Immunity. I mean, he was basically saying that whoever this person is should ride on the king's horse. And she renounced up in the streets of Shushan, this is what we do to the person who the king really likes. So based on his suggestion, and based on the facts on the ground that he was the closest person to Achashverosh, it's safe to assume that before he gave the advice, he thought that he's the person. And everything is proving that that's what he was thinking. So you don't need to say that that's not proof that it was Ruach HaKodesh. And that when he elaborated extensively, it said, he said himself with himself in mind. So from here we see clearly that Haman, from everything is pointing that Haman thought he was the candidate. So therefore, that's not a proof that Mordechai and Esther wrote the Megillah with Ruach HaKodesh. So Rashi says, "What's ma'afish v'amatuva?" The fact that the person who the king likes should be wearing the king's crown and clothing, that's good of him to know. He wouldn't suggest that nothing about Haman's character, who was a jealous, hateful person, would offer such a reward to someone else. If he for a second thought that even, forget Mordechai, but even another colleague who is in competition for the king's favor, right? Achashverosh was a very temperamental person. He changes ideas and friends fast. He changes allegiance very fast. There's no way Haman, who's trying at all times to be in with the king, would give such a suggestion if it was someone else. If he even had a doubt, a small doubt that it was going to someone else, it would hurt the company. It would hurt his standing. That's surely what he was thinking, that he was the candidate. So it's not exactly 100% perfect proof to say that he wrote it with Ruach HaKodesh. Okay. So Tosfos says the question that I asked, right? Tosfos says that the Rava says I can't slug up, I can't refute any of the other proofs. I can refute all the proofs but Shmuel. Shmuel says because it's kind of a kiblu. The kasha. So the Tosfos asks the question: the Shmuel mean lekapircha? You cannot refute Shmuel's. The Harava Gufa who the Omer Berk Rabbi Akiva. Rava himself says in Shabbos, in the tractate called Rabbi Akiva, that's the name of the tractate. Mikan Moida Rabbi Lairaisa. The fact that this is like it was not a positive statement for how the Jewish people took the Torah when the Jewish people accepted the Torah, Matan Torah. Shekiblu Shenis Me'achashverosh. That the Jewish people, and it's brought on Chassidus many times, that what the Jewish people accepted on Mount Sinai was it was forced. They accepted the Torah. It took them the whole Judges in the Book of Kings and the prophets and the destruction of the first temple, until they really accepted the Torah. That this, what they took in Matan Torah, was cemented. That's what the pasuk is saying. Kaimu v'kiblu, that what they accepted in Matan Torah, they accepted properly in the days of Achashverosh and Haman and Mordechai. So that's no proof that it's talking about that the heavenly court accepted the holiday. We need the pasuk for another teaching. Tosfos answers, it's not such a big deal, because we could learn two things from it. One is that the Jewish people accepted the Torah a second time in a more weird way after the story of Mordechai, even more than accepted it by Mount Sinai, and also that God accepted the story of Mordechai. Why? Because he has a verse to show that it was written with Ruach HaKodesh. Every other suggestion that we say that Mordechai and Esther wrote the book with Ruach HaKodesh were based on logic, but the logic could go another way, like Haman. There's no proof that Mordechai had Ruach HaKodesh because he knew what Haman was thinking. That's obviously what he was thinking. There's no possibility he was thinking something else. Okay. This that Rabbi Akiva said, what was Rabbi Akiva's idea? Rabbi Akiva's idea, to remind ourselves, Rabbi Akiva was that everyone found Esther pleasant. Anyone who saw Esther found that she was attractive. How do we know that? So it says we have an answer to that also. Dilma Rabbi Elazar. We have another Rabbi Elazar that says, again, you have to remember, we don't know where Esther comes from. The Megillah says, Mordechai tells Esther, don't identify your origin. So therefore, everyone said, she's from us. She's a Phoenician, she's an Egyptian, she's a Greek, wherever other countries were under Achashverosh, everyone was taking credit for Esther. Because it's, again, nothing's changed, right? People are always, if someone has, that's our person. We invented that. What did Einstein say? That if my theory is right, then they're going to say I was a German. If it's wrong, they're going to say I was a Jew. So everyone was saying that look, Esther, where she comes from us. So therefore, it's obviously that everyone liked her. Everyone wanted to take her. Everyone wanted to be Esther's friend. She's part of us. She's one of our girls. So from here we know that everyone liked her. Again, to know that everyone likes Esther, that's not major Ruach HaKodesh, the Gemara says. Rava says. And what did the Omer say? The Omer says because Mordechai knew what Diksan V'Serish was saying. So he had to be Ruach HaKodesh. Who says that Ruach HaKodesh? Shnei Tarshishim Hayu. They're from Tarshish. They didn't speak a language. They were speaking, meaning the idea is that because they were speaking Tarshish, so they thought no one knew what they were saying. They were speaking openly in front of Mordechai. Mordechai knew Tarshish because he was a member of the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin had to know languages, like they had to know all sciences. Right? The Sanhedrin had to be familiar with everything that was going on. Right? You can't be a rabbi and say this is Avodah Zarah if you don't know what Avodah Zarah is. Today, the Rebbe said, someone when they came out with different questions of electricity in the early years of the Rebbe's prophet in the Rebbe's leadership, so there was a whole discussion about traveling on a boat on Shabbos. The Rebbe, with all due respect, wrote to some of the rabbis, I'm an engineer. I studied engineering in college. The Rebbe says, I understand the science of the boats. I can tell you if you're allowed to drive it on Shabbos, if you could go on it on Shabbos. You can't give a psak about something if you don't know the science of it. The Sanhedrin had an obligation to know everything. They had to know all the science. They had to know all the Avodah Zarah. They had to know you can't be a judge if you don't know what you're dealing with. They had to know all the languages. That's one of the qualifications of the Sanhedrin. So they were speaking Tarshish, and they didn't know that. Mordechai knew that. I'll tell you a nice story of the Ger Rebbe in a second. The Rav Chia bar Abba, we'll learn this a little later. The Rav Chia bar Abba says that they were speaking Tarshish, so it's no proof that it was Ruach HaKodesh. This refers to people from the city of Tarshish in Asia Minor. Okay. So they knew what he was saying. What's the story with the Ger Rebbe? Everyone knows, anyone who's been to Eretz Yisrael or read about Eretz Yisrael knows that there was one of the big beneficiaries of Eretz Yisrael in the early years, before the state, obviously, was Moshe Montefiore, right? We have a lot of Zichra Moshe, Yamin Moshe. These are all things that are sponsored by the very big worldly banker from England, Moshe Montefiore. So Moshe Montefiore and his wife, they were big donors, and they did a lot of things for Jewish people. So Moshe Montefiore once met the Ger Rebbe, and he asked the Ger Rebbe a question on this Gemara. He said that it says that Mordechai knew Tarshish. Means that he was educated. He had secular education. He knew this language of Tarshish. He knew a language that most people didn't know. That's why they spoke in front of him. They weren't concerned. So he said, look, he was telling the Ger Rebbe, why are you against secular education for the yeshiva students? Mordechai needed to have a secular education. So look, we have proof from the Megillah that you have to give secular education from the Gemara. So the Ger Rebbe said, no, absolutely, the proof is the opposite. If Dixon and Serish would know that every Jewish kid had a secular education, they would never speak in front of Mordechai. They thought Mordechai was a rabbi who had no secular education, didn't know Tarshish. He felt free to speak in front of him. He said you have to have certain individuals like Mordechai, like Moshe Montefiore, that their education is good enough to help the Jewish people. But if every yeshiva student was learning Tarshish, then Bixen and Serish would never speak in front of them. All right, that's the story of Bixen and Serish and Moshe Montefiore. Now, what about Rabbi Yossi ben Durmaskis? What did he say again? Moshe ben Durmaskis said, Rabbi Yossi ben Durmaskis said that Rabbi Yossi ben Durmaskis says because that they didn't touch the spoils. So how do we know that they didn't touch the spoils? Dilma pre-stockade. So the dispatched messengers, they wanted Shadur, they sent messengers. They sent messengers to Esther and Mordechai that they wanted them to know specifically they did not touch the spoils. Okay, hold on a second. Okay. Says so. But the Shmuel says that they knew that Hashem agreed with the holiday. That's obviously Ruach HaKodesh. Omer Ravina says, so the fact is that Rava said that every one of the rabbis' proof is not proof. The later rabbi Shmuel is able to say proof. First of all, Shmuel is very humble. Shmuel says, if I was there, meaning to say that I'm not there, therefore, we can't have this. We could just say in theory if I was there, but I wasn't there. So Omer Avinu, this is what people say. Tavachada pilpalta charifta mimlei sane korei. That one sharp pepper is better than a basket full of pumpkins, right? A pumpkin doesn't, as people know, pumpkins are a little bland, but a small sharp pepper gives a sharp taste. So, he was comparing basically, Ravina was saying basically, all the rabbis gave, pumpkin ideas, but a little bit of spice from Shmuel gives the insight. That we could say that specifically they sent messengers. So Achashverosh should not, again, they knew they're dealing with a temperamental guy who could flip on the second. Literally, you don't have to, we could look at our own situation here, could flip on the second. And therefore they made sure to send a message to Mordechai and Esther that we did not touch the spoils. So Achashverosh had not just, he was getting rid of Haman and he was finding favor in Esther, but obviously the money went to Achashverosh. It didn't just stick with the families. Achashverosh collected all that spoils. So there was a financial, monetary benefit for him as well. It is explained in the Orach that a pepper, although it is small, is spicy and preferable to the relatively bland pumpkin. Likewise, although Shmuel was an Amora, whose standing is less significant than the Tanoim, meaning the rabbis of the Mishnah, who discussed this matter, his statement is more reasonable. Now, Rav Yossi, this discussion goes on. Rav Yossi says, how do we know that the book of Esther was written in the divine spirit? Because we have a pasuk. The pasuk says, again, most of what we're going to discuss in Esther is Esther 9, because it's really the verse that deals with how the story of Purim happened afterwards. So the verse in chapter 9:28, it says, and these days of Purim shall not cease from among the Jews. How do you know to say that? How can you say a statement that what's going to cease and what's not going to cease? It has to be. Ruach HaKodesh says so. The Torah testifies. There's a continuation of the pasuk. Nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. So the memorial of Purim is also going to be there. Question is, why do we need both verses? We'll see in a second. How do we know what the future is going to be? Because the Torah says so. It's because the reason Rav Nachman says the second explanation is because the first explanation, the first pasuk that says that V'imei Purim Yavrim Techa Yehudim could be talking about the present Jews. It doesn't show clearly that's talking about the future. But the fact that it says V'zichram, that the memorial, the memory of it, that's talking about the future, that's clearly talking about a futuristic time, and therefore that's a testimony that's a sign that it was written with Ruach HaKodesh. So to say there's other psukim. The Gemara Yishalmi says from the pasuk of Zichron leYosem Mizarim. From this we learn that there should be a special tractate of Megillah. Megillah is its own Masechta in the Mishnais, right? The fact that we have a tractate Megillah is because there's a Mishnais Megillah. The Rambam writes also that from this pasuk that V'zichron, that the memorial of Purim will last forever. So the Rambam in Hilchas Megillah Perek Beis Halachi Yitches writes that from this verse we learn the Megillat Esther Leiti Batul Meis Mashiach, that when Mashiach comes we're still going to have the Megillat Esther. That the pasuk is not just saying testimony that for the next 2,500 years the Jewish people will celebrate Purim, but that even when Mashiach comes we're going to celebrate Purim. Right around the Ravid says, what do you mean? And everything else is going to go? But it's not going to be as prominent. The story of Megillah of Purim is going to be a special story even when the times of Mashiach comes. When Mashiach comes, it's like a candle, they say, like Shagar B'tira. When you have a little candle in the dark, oh wow, this candle gives me all the light. But also the morning sun comes out to you, what's the candle going to do? Purim is such a big story that even when the great light of Mashiach comes, we're still going to celebrate Purim. The Rambam writes that. So that's why we see clearly that there's that the book of Purim was written, the book of Esther was written with Ruach HaKodesh. Let's just see. Tosfos explains that Rav Nachman added the source citing by Rav Yosef. Some explain that from the first part of the verse cited by Rav Nachman, it can be determined that only that the Jews took upon themselves to remember the days of Purim. Therefore, Rav Yosef cited the pronouncement of this in the second part of the verse, nor the memorial of them shall perish their seed from their seed, which is stated with divine inspiration. Okay. We have 15 minutes. Let's go further because I want to go into the next sugya. We finished this question about how do we know Esther is written with Ruach HaKodesh. We have different proofs. We have Shmuel. We have the later rabbis from the Talmud that says from the fact that the Torah testifies that Megillat Esther testifies that the book of Esther, the story of Purim, is going to be forever. That's obviously futuristic, and you can't know that without Ruach HaKodesh. Okay. Now we're going back to the hard laws of Purim. And what does it say? That on Purim you have to send Matanot La'Evyonim. Our Mishnah is talking about 2 Purims, right? If you have the 2 others, the other in the first month, other the second month, so when do you have to give gifts to the poor? But we have to understand, what does the gifts to the poor mean at all? How much do you have to give to poor? This is not an easy subject, because again, when we get to halachas of Purim, it's not so easy, because we have to know, how much gift do we have to give? How much presents do we have to give our friends? There's 2 things. There's Mishloach Manot, there's sending portions to one another, which is not a charity. That's a sign of re'eu, friendship. And in the Shulchan Aruch, it actually gets very deep about how do you define a friend, and who is a friend. Like, could you give? Everyone knows it's a very uncomfortable. There's a possibility for Mishloach Manot to be an unpleasant situation. Why? Gift to the poor is gift to the poor, right? You go to the shul, you know someone that needs help, you give them a gift. Mishloach Manot is a statement of friendship. Someone could sit, God forbid, so it shouldn't happen to anyone, but you could sit a whole day and no one comes to bring them a present. That doesn't make a person feel too good about themselves, right? The Mishloach Manot is a statement. Do you have friends? And what's you considered your friends? And who are your friends that you have to give it to? It's a tricky holiday because with all its fun, it's, I once was listening to a radio show at night and during the secular holidays. And it was saying that while everyone's celebrating, for some people, it's very hard. Xmas or New Year's, if you don't have family, God forbid. So you feel it could be a very lonely time for some. While something is a time of celebration for some, it can be a very lonely time for others. And this person made a special show for people that could come and join the show, so they shouldn't feel lonely in the holidays. A lot of people say, "Well, we're not having a show tonight. It's Xmas. It's New Year's." But he specifically made a show then, so to be sensitive for people that they should be able to find others to hang out with on the radio, even for these times. But Purim is also one of those kind of crosses that question, because it's Mishloach Manot ish l're'eyu. You send portions to your friends. So the Gemara says like this: Matanot La'Evyonim, Tanach Rav Yosef. Yosef said, "Mishloach Manot ish l're'eyu." You send portions to your friends. Again, all these questions that the Gemara goes into. That sometimes you go, a person doesn't know. There's discussions you have. Should we send to this person? Should we send this? Are they or not? Do they make our list? Don't they make our list? They have sometimes a question of, did this family give us last year? Do we have to give them this year? Right? All these questions come up. So then you have also a question, and sometimes you want to give up. What does it mean to give up? Let's say the president of the shul, or a business person, or the rabbi. Am I supposed to give the rabbi Mishloach Manot? The rabbi is the rabbi. Well, maybe the rabbi has to give me Mishloach Manot, so maybe it's not right. Maybe he has to wait for, who goes first? The Gemara discusses this in between the lines. The Rishonim learn from different stories about how the rabbis gave each other portions to know if you're giving up or if you're giving down. Does the rabbi have to give first, or does the student have to give first? Does the congregation give the rabbis, the rabbi give the congregation? So it says, Mishloach Manot ish l're'eyu. We send portions to our friends. Shtei manos le'ish echad. How much do you have to give? 2 portions to one person. That's the mitzvah of Mishloach Manot. Means one person should have 2 portions of food. What is defined as 2 portions? We also have to learn. Could it include liquids? We see from the Gemaras, we're going to learn that your social standing and what you gift is a message. People may think, what's the difference? I'm just going to go to the supermarket, quickly grab a bag of peanuts and a Coca-Cola and give that. We see from the Gemara that the Gemara Abaye tells his uncle Rabba, now that you're the Rosh Hashiva, you have to give nicer Shalach Manas. People are going to think you're stingy, or people are going to think you don't care about them. Again, and we can't go too far. People go way too far with the Shalach Manas. But how much you have to give halachically is 2 portions to one person. Matanot La'Evyonim, how much gift to the poor do you have to give? Shtei matanis 2. Manis means portions. It's not a gift. Manis is a portion. But the definition of a portion is different than the definition of a gift. Usually a gift could be a pruta. A pruta means, it's a very small amount of value. How much do you have to give the poor also? Do they have to give the poor enough money that they should be able to buy food or not? If you give a person a quarter or even $1 today, in today's inflation, in Mishloach Manot, in Matanot La'Evyonim, are you going to the mitzvah? Is $1 enough? What could you do with $1 today? I mean, how much money do you have to give someone to the gift of the poor or to the portions of your friend that's considered giving halachically something? So you have to give Matanot La'Evyonim, shtei matanis l'shnei bnei adam. This line is not so clear because matanos is plural and avyonim is plural. Matanis is gifts, plural. Avyonim is poor people, plural. So, and then the Gemara statement is not clear, to me at least. Shtei matanis l'shnei bnei adam, seemingly the Gemara understands 2 single gifts to 2 single people. But you can also understand it to mean 2 gifts to 2 people means 4 gifts in total. But it doesn't seem like that how I understand it. Because it could have said, again, I'm not a master in the grammar, but I think it could have said, Matanot La'Evyonim means a gift to people, plural, which would mean a gift to 2 people, or maybe that one Matanah would be divided, but whatever. It's not so clear. Matanis meaning Madanim, but what's Manes mean? Manes means food, and halachically, a lot of people are very careful. Could you give someone a raw piece of food that they have to cook? We learn and also you have to kind of add to meals. There's a lot of rules we're going to learn about with the Mishloach Manot. So I printed up. I did some stuff in English. We'll get there maybe today, this week or next week. Shtei manos l'adam echad. How much you have to give? 2 portions to one person. Tifsiv. How do we know that that's what you have to give? It says Mishloach Manot ish l're'eyu. Send manos, which is plural, portions, a person to his friend, one person to one friend. Shtei manos l'adam echad. So clearly, the minimal that you have to give for Mishloach Manot is 2 portions of food to one person. Matanot La'Evyonim. What is Matanot plural? La'Evyonim, 2 poor people plural. Shtei matanos l'shnei bnei adam. 2 gifts to 2 people. Dai l'chol echad v'echad matana achas. So Rashi spells it out. Each one of the poor people could get 1 gift. The avyonim nami tarti mashma. Because avyonim also means plural. Matanis is plural. So the plural means we're separating the plural of the gifts from the plural of the poor people. Gifts to 2 people that are poor too. 1 gift to each person. You could also, again, I'm not a master of grammar at all, but it could also mean 2 gifts to 2 people, meaning 4 gifts in total. But Rashi says no, it means 2 gifts to 2 people, 1 gift to each person. Mishloach Manot Reb Steinzat says like this. Hold on a second. Okay. So let's just do Reb Steinzat, and then we have 8 minutes. We'll see how far we could get in the halachic discussion here. Every person is obligated to send 2 portions of food or drink to another person, i.e. 1 person. They must be different types of food. Merely giving a quarter log of drink or an olive bulk of food is insufficient. I mean, you say, what's the minimum amount of food? A cookie. So if I give 2 cookies, it's 2 foods. No, it's not. It doesn't make. You can't just give a lot of one food. You have to give 2 types of food. It could be a liquid. We're going to discuss liquids are okay. So it is insufficient. Rather, it is appropriate to give generous portions. And also, you can't give minimal. You can't just give a tiny bit of liquids and a tiny bit of food. You have to give substantial. Again, doesn't mean you have to come with a tray of chicken, but it's something that has to be of substance. It's a man. It's a portion. Something you would want to be served. If you're on a plane, right? As we're all a little older than others, so we all remember flying on the planes, even a domestic flight from Seattle to Los Angeles, that you got a piece of chicken. Today, you don't get any food domestically, and even internationally, you can cut the chicken 17 ways. So there's you have to have a proper portion to each person. What about women? Are women obligated to give Mishloach Manot? So it's just a male thing. So Rav Steinzal says women are obligated in sending portions just as men are. Obviously, the question is, if you have a family, a couple, can a couple bring minimal just one Mishloach Manot? It seems no. It's not a family obligation, it's a personal obligation. So if there's a husband and wife, the husband has to give one and the wife has to give one. Right? So just like if there's roommates, you can't just say, well, we're giving one person. It has to be enough food for each person to give 2 manes to 2 people. So women are obligated in sending portions just as men are. It is appropriate for a woman to give to a woman and for a man to give to a man, so says the Rama, obviously for the laws of tznius. But we can also learn about Mishloach. Actually, the word Mishloach Manot means sending portions. So the obviously you have to send the portion with someone else. So if you get to just hand someone a Mishloach Manot, it's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to send it. So the husband could give the wife to send on his behalf, and the wife could give the husband to send on her behalf. But you have to send it. It is permitted to send money and other non-food items if they can be used on the day to purchase on components for the festival meal. You could send money if the money could be used on that same day for the person to buy what they need for the meal. But the idea is you're sending portions for the meal of that day. Some maintain that even in this case, one fulfills his obligation only with food. Not everyone agrees with that. If Sheinzat says even if you could run to the supermarket or to the ready-made food store and buy food for the meal, it's still not enough. You have to actually send food. Even one who is dependent on another for sustenance, although he is not obligated, should fulfill the mitzvah to send portions to another person. The Magen Avram says even if you're a person taking from tzedakah, you should also still try to send Mishloach Manot. This mitzvah is fulfilled during the day of Purim and at night. So a lot of people have the customs to try to get Mishloach Manot out of the way early. So either they have it sent in the mail and it arrives before, or they go at night in the Megillah. That's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah it's connected to the meal. It has to be done in the day after the reading of the Megillah in the morning. So in the morning hour, at sometime in the morning. So after in the morning, that's when the mitzvah again. You could give Mishloach Manot to 100 people in all ways, but one person at least has to be the proper mitzvah, because everything else is just nice things. But yeah, at least it means if a person thinking to themselves, I'm going to send a whole bunch of things to a whole bunch of people, but a very tiny amount. Make sure one person you're doing it the right way, because otherwise you're not fulfilling the mitzvah at all. It is appropriate to send the portion with a messenger. Like I said, you shouldn't be giving it yourself, both to display a difference to the mitzvah and to fulfill the literal meaning of the verse, which is sending portions. So as opposed to this is all brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, we're going to stop here. We're going to learn next week. We're going to go into stories. And from these stories, we're going to learn about who the sender was, who the giver was, how they responded. From here until to the end of the Mishnah, we're going to learn about different stories of people who sent gifts or had meals together. You could also have a potluck, is also, by the way, Mishloach Manot. If everyone brings food to the table and everyone's going to be able to eat from it, that's also Mishloach Manot. But I also printed up over here. Again, my computer doesn't behave when I want it to. But I also took from over here different halachic footnotes, a little bit more than Reb Steinsaltz, on the discussion of Mishloach Manot, which I'm going to want to go through. Because again, the end of the day these are halacha l'maisa. Purim is something that we celebrate together. Let's just do one. So he says like this: Rabbi Yosef taught from which written the word of sending portions. The simple wording of the verse seems to imply that specifically sending is required. You have to be Mishloach Manot. You actually have to send. This also appears from the wording in the Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim 695.4. One is obligated to send to his fellow 2 portions. See Mishnah Brura, who cites that in the response of Bnei Tzion, there is uncertainty whether one fulfills obligation if he brings the portion himself rather than through a messenger. Perhaps it must specifically be via an agent. So the Mishnah Brura says almost lahalacha, you must send it. So again, a lot of people on Purim, it's busy and happening. You have to stay focused a little bit, at least for one person, to properly do the mitzvah. Send it 2 portions to one person. The Ramah writes that woman is obligated to Mishloach Manot and gifts to the poor, both. The Ramah says that a woman has to give both Mishloach Manot and gifts to the poor. Then Mishnah Berurah explains this is because they were to include in the miracle. The Bri Chadash questions the Ramah. The verse says a man, implying that women should be exempt. And the Shvut Yaakov who resolves the Ramah's position, meaning the language is ish. Ish is a man. So what's the basis for a woman? So they discuss this. We'll do one more. In the response to Torah Lishma from the Ben Ish Chai, it is written that that if one places two portions in a single vessel, like you have like today, a basket or a bag, it is considered like one portion. Again, so that's why some people have, I'm not sure if it's based on this, the Ben Ish Chai, that people bag the bags. Let's say you have cookies, they don't just put cookies and an apple, they'll put the cookies in a bag and the apple, like if you separate them, it could be that will take care of what the Ben Ish Chai is saying. And he has not fulfilled the obligation of Mishloach Manot because he didn't send two gifts. See there for proof more. The Leket Yosher writes that one fulfills Mishloach Manot even with one fig and one date, even if they're not worth a pruta. So that's unlike what we said before, that we said that you should have, Reb Sheinzot says you should be generous. The Chassam Sofer says, it is stated that one fulfills the mitzvah only if he himself has a prepared meal, and the portion he gives is in addition to his own meal. Otherwise, it's considered a gift to the poor. So here, the Chassam Sofer says, I'm not sure if he means, hold on, I want to make sure if he means the person who receives the meal or the person who's giving the meal. Chassam Sofer says, no, it's the English is a little bad in the translation. The person who's receiving the meal has to have a meal. Otherwise, it means there's a meal and you're adding to the meal. If you're just giving someone, then it's tzedakah. If the person has nothing to eat, it's tzedakah. But we're going to see from the next piece of Gemara, it's not so simple. According to some opinions, the next piece of Gemara, that if you give a little bit, then it's Matanot La'Evyonim. If you give a lot, then it's Mishloach Manot. All right, we're going to stop over here, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining. We'll just finish up quickly. Next week, the few responses on the laws of Mishloach Manot. We're holding, I think, 239. And then we'll continue with the stories through the Mishnah about different stories of the Talmud times of how people prepared and did the mitzvahs of Yom Tov. Laila Tov, everyone. Thank you. Take care and happy Lag BaOmer.
Thank you, Rabbi. Lag BaOmer.